Well, afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today on this next LinkedIn Live, where we're going to explore a little bit more about the relationship across the management board. Through this series, we've touched on a whole range of topics, and this, for me, is a topic that I feel is a really important one to share a discussion. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by both Tracy and JT. I do want to say a massive thanks to everyone who's supported this series to date. I know people both watch us live and also watch us back in their own time, and all of your feedback and your contributions have really helped us continue this subject, continue this LinkedIn Live series, and hopefully adding some value to those people who watch us. So before we get going today, I'd love to just do a couple of introductions, just so you understand who's with us today. So why don't we start with Tracy, if you're happy. Tracy, give us a bit of an intro into your role and your background.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me on to do this, Paul. I think it's be a really interesting conversation. But yeah, so my background is sort of 20 years plus working as a board executive of a tech firm. And so spent quite a long time on the executive side of the table, building a public sector business principally, but doing other kinds of executive roles, sort of COO related activities, and kind of reached a natural point of wanting to work out what I did next, and decided that maybe a portfolio might be an interesting place to go and play. I'd always wanted to do a non-exec role actually in government. That might make you judge me, that's fine, but actually I thought it was something that I would really enjoy doing, and I am a non-exec of a government department, and that's really quite interesting, and will play in some of the things we want to talk around from a governance perspective. But I think in this type of role, variety is really important. So my portfolio is, I think, quite diverse actually. I've got some not-for-profit startup style activities, and I've also got some more traditional tech, which kind of plays into the background that I've naturally got. And then of course there's Agena, and Agena is a really interesting one for me, because I don't think it would be unfair to say I don't know much about parking, or certainly knew virtually nothing about parking when I was invited to join the board. But actually, there was a lot about the organisation that I thought would be really interesting. In the 18 months since I've been involved with the business. Well, first of all, I know a lot more about parking than I ever thought was possible. But secondly, as well, is all the things that I hoped were true about the business have really come to pass. And really enjoyed the time I've been involved, and hopefully made a difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tracy. And Jonathan, or JT, as I would normally refer to you.
Yeah, well, only my mum calls me Jonathan, despite my age these days. But I'm Jonathan. Everyone calls me JT, as you said, Paul. I'm a partner here at Sovereign Capital, the investor in Agena today. And I look after, with a colleague, the work we do in business services and technology. Agena is a perfect example of both of those crossing over, I think, actually, the combination of services, technology driven, but also the use of data, which we'll come on to. I've been at Sovereign for a decade now, and before that worked for a FTSE 100 listed business called Experian. So that itself is a financial and credit information and data business. I help them buy businesses throughout the UK, throughout Europe, and a couple further afield as well, overseas. Trained as a chartered accountant at KPMG originally, but that feels like a lifetime ago now. Paul, you and I first met, five, 6 years ago now, when the Agena journey started, and I think the business has quadrupled in size since then, and it's come on a huge way through organic growth and a bunch of the M&A we've done, which I'm sure we'll talk about when it comes to data as well. But it's been very exciting so far.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and hopefully some exciting opportunities this year for us as well. Obviously, as we've said on previous episodes, we've been through a lot of change, faced some challenges through the back end of COVID, and I guess look forward to what this new government will bring in terms of policy and how that will facilitate opportunity both in our sector and more widely across the economy. I guess today what I'm really keen to focus on is how that relationship across the board table works. And, and I like to feel we have quite a open and transparent way of working. I feel like we have a significant amount in terms of measurement points across the business. And I guess keen to explore how our board meetings kind of are focused in terms of, the success of the business, the challenges we face, and how we move forward. And I guess from my perspective, what I find particularly important in this relationship is there's no fear of sharing any news, actually. No fear of sharing good news, no fear of sharing bad news. And I guess from your perspectives, it'd be great to understand how important that kind of openness and that transparency is in this board relationship, and how, I guess, you perceive that openness and transparency in the setting that we sit within, and maybe how that compares to other environments you operate in.
Shall I go first, Tracy? Or
you go first. Go on.
Yeah. So from the investor side of the table, a phrase I always use is no surprises, whether they are good. We want to know the good news, of course, but we also want to share in the bad news or the challenges. And the reason for that is, we like to think with the involvement of an investor, if there is an opportunity, we can perhaps help you unlock it, hopefully, if you haven't unlocked it already. But if there's a challenge, it might be something you've not come across before, or a situation developing that we may have experience, or we know someone who can help. So that no surprises is, please, whatever's going on, the good and the bad, tell us. And hopefully then we can take advantages of opportunities together, but also overcome challenges. COVID's a great example of that, right? That wasn't something you had to share because it was headline news. But obviously that was a very rapidly changing situation, and we all teamed together around the board table to help Agena through that. And it's gone from strength to strength since then. So yeah, no surprises. Let's keep chatting about the good and the bad.
I think if you connect into that, JT, and then kind of, if I think about it from a non-exec perspective, which is a slightly different perspective, the point of a non-exec at the end of the day is to be a constructive voice around the table, isn't it? It's a critical friend, it's some constructive challenge. That's almost impossible if you haven't got transparency and openness in the relationship. There's no way I can bring, any expertise, any perspective to a situation if you haven't got that. But I do think it also probably connects to some of my own personal measures about whether or not to get involved in a business. Now, I made the comment in my introduction about the fact that, parking is not a natural sector for me. So what was the rationale for me agreeing to join the board? Well, it was a few things, and it was the same criteria I applied to anything, and it plays into this point about openness. Is, first of all, I have to like the people. I have to feel that there can be some form of personal and business chemistry, but at the end of the day, it's about people, and I don't think that's any different for investors, JT, in all honesty. No. And the second thing is, I have to understand where my value would sit. I have to be able to clearly see, even if I don't understand the sector in detail, that there are opportunities or there are potential areas where I can naturally get involved. And thirdly, and this is a bit of a nice to have rather than a definite, is I like it to have a bit of tech. You can't make me completely out of tech, and clearly we have that in Agena. But I think that then plays into that's how you build the chemistry in the relationship in order to be able to move forward. But it has to start from a position of honesty. And I'd throw it back probably to the executive and say, you've got to go, any executive has got to go into that kind of board engagement with a little bit of pure of heart, of wanting it to work and recognizing that everybody is on the same side. And if you don't think you're all on the same side, probably need to sit down and evaluate which side is the wrong side, because otherwise the business isn't going to succeed. Ultimately, it isn't, because it becomes inward looking and not outward looking.
And yeah, and I think what's particularly interesting for me is the board's such a great source of experience, knowledge, expertise, but also such a great source of opinion when you're not consumed by the detail. Yeah. And I guess, when you're leading an organization, it's hard to know where you can go and have a conversation about options, about safety, about, you know, from a CEO point of view, having that ability to explore options is typically not something I would do with my team all of the time, depending on the topic of the conversation. And I guess I see so many people who are probably more fearful of what the consequence might be if they don't come into that board with exactly the right answer, feeling like they're in control of every part of the detail, and are not using the expertise around the table to explore. And I think for me, you know, the greatest thing I take from those board sessions is that ability to have an opinion, but not be definitive, you know, to explore what I might think might be a great idea. And as we all know, I think I have great ideas every day. We all also know that they're not always fabulous, but it's through that exploration and that conversation which allows me to kind of really conclude what we need to do. And I think for me, it's my safe place every month to come and talk about the things which aren't our core business and maybe the things that I want to achieve. And I guess I wonder how many people running businesses don't take that opportunity with the expertise around the table to just explore a conversation or an option.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because certainly personally, I think one of the most valuable characteristics in life generally, but it certainly applies in this particular context, it's curiosity. It's asking the questions. It's not the assumption of the answer. You know, we have lots of conversations, don't we, where I spend most of my time, it feels like, asking you questions. But part of that is, and it would be the same with all of the exec, isn't it? The answers usually lie within the team. Yeah. Actually, the power of the board is to get the team to be the highest performance it can be. And you do that not by telling people what to do, maybe by sometimes steering the direction, but broadly by getting people to act on what they know, or just to add some colour, some context, some detail into something.
Or perhaps that they can't see because they're too close to detail and they're day-to-day doing a great job at what they do day-to-day.
Yeah.
And the board conversation can ask some questions about the direction of the company, near term, short term, and perhaps generate other ideas and feedback from that. Because really, the goal is to ask those questions and try and help to make a great company even better. Fundamentally, that's what everyone's trying to achieve, aren't they?
I see that as well, JT, in the way that you guys, the way the investor approaches the conversation. You know, the contribution that you make in the board is in that vein, isn't it? Don't always get that, but I think it's something that actually the board has harnessed really, really well.
And there's also, when you think about a private equity investor in particular, I think people often think about just, well, I'm going to see these guys and girls at a monthly board meeting. I think something we do really well, Paul, is that relationship outside of the board as well.
Yeah.
And it's not formal, it's not diarised, but we probably speak every fortnight or so. As I famously say, you're often driving home after a long week. And
you're usually on a train.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm usually on a train.
with bad signal. But we chat through the good, the bad, what's gone on. Can I just run this past you? Can I get your view on that? And so we achieve a huge amount, actually quite casually, outside of a more formalized, structured board meeting as well, I think, which I find really important for Egina. And I think it's really good practice for the CEO and investor as well, because there's a lot that can be achieved and discussed and progress made outside of that formal setting.
But that makes it not just functional then, doesn't it? What you're describing is that basis of trust and confidence. It's much wider than just the functional or the governance or whatever you think. It ceases to be a transactional relationship and becomes truly embedded in the psyche and the culture of the business, doesn't it?
I think that comes back to what I said earlier is, what is our goal as an investor? We want to be a partner to the management team in the business, take a great business, make it even better. And I sat there and just asking questions every 4 weeks, the same ones around the numbers, isn't going to achieve that. I think it has to be a greater contribution and greater conversation and input than that.
And I think, JT, if if I think about the relationships around that board table,
Mm.
I can't think of any of us who don't have those relationships and engagements outside of the formality of the meeting. And I do think that goes a long way then when we do come together, we're focused on, that meeting, the content that we need to talk about, the decisions we need to make that day. And for me, that's such an important part of it. I won't wait for the next board meeting to share some news, kind of good or bad. We all sit separately as part of a little WhatsApp group, and I think also that's a really great way of just sharing instant news that by the time we get to our board meeting on reporting cycles with finances, some of those updates can be 3-4 weeks out of date.
Yeah.
And for me, it's about how you build that information flowing outside the board structure. And our board structure obviously is the most formal session when we come together. But I guess for me, I see our relationship so much more than just when we meet once a month. I guess added to that, and I know, Tracy, you form part of our advisory board as well, is that combination of our board and our advisory board where we brought in, specific expertise to help guide us. And for me, JT, that was something that, brought to us by Sovereign as a recommendation of something to consider. I know it's something you had in other businesses, but for me, that combination of both is incredibly important, actually. And I guess the individuals we've assembled across both boards has been a real source of real, I guess, intellect in the sectors that we've wanted to move forward. But I guess, Tracy, interested in your observations of the advisory board alongside our kind of formal board structure as well.
Yeah, I think I'd come across an advisory board, but probably not as well constituted as it is in Agena. And also, as you say already, the quality of who's on that board and what opportunity that presents. I think, speaking personally, the advisory board is quite freeing. It's quite a liberating environment because there's a bit of a clue in the title, isn't there? Its job is to advise. So actually, there's a bit of freedom in the discussion. There's an opportunity to kind of really, pull at the edges and kind of take yourself into a space where maybe we wouldn't feel it was a valuable use of board time or what have you. And I think that's, first of all, it's, as I say, it's quite freeing. It's good fun. They're good fun discussions. But secondly, as well, is it's quite an innovative thing to do. But also what it does is it means there's a really clear distinction between the roles of those boards in terms of what the intended output is. And that means that actually they both deliver against a really clear set of terms of references, rather than what you often see, and I have seen this before, where there's a bit of bleeding between the sort of that strategic sort of advisory kind of idea and how that bleeds too far into the operation of the business. So yeah. I think it's a great model. I think it's got some real value, and so much so that I've pitched the idea for another one of the businesses. I mean, it's so brilliant,
And I guess just thinking about the board meeting itself, I guess we have two sources of information on the business and our performance and our longevity. So, JT, we have what we call our KPI pack, which has a couple of data points and measurement pieces in there. Which I guess serves to make sure that from a data perspective, we're feeding all of the right measurement points. And I guess when I say a couple, I probably mean a couple of hundred in reality in terms of measurements on the business. And then we have the board pack itself, which I guess is the document that we talk about the most. So it'd be great, JT, just from an investor perspective, to understand the importance of both of those and the fact that we deliver them differently. And whilst there is some crossover, I guess they are serving different purposes from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. If we just touch on the board pack very quickly, a 20-page document we canter through at a board meeting, that's far more strategic, I would say. It's commenting on, okay, here's what's happened in the month or the year to date so far. But more importantly, here's the direction we're heading. And on top of that, here are the other areas, services we could offer, sectors we could go into, etc. And so we're always talking about those as part of that talk through of a board presentation. As you said, Paul, we've then got a far more detailed financial pack. And actually, one thing you and Agenia have done really well is automating a lot of that with tools like Power BI, data visualization tools. It's a touch of a button. You've got your app where you can really deep dive into any statistic on the business, really. And that's far more operational, which I'm sure we'll come back to. But for us, those KPIs, it's the creation of a bunch of data points, current, but also forward looking, which help us understand the business performance. And it might not be that we look at all of those every month, because as you'll know, a ton of them demonstrate super consistent long-term trends, and there's not much deviation. But every now and again, you get an anomaly, and it helps us discuss those at the board meeting in a broader environment and try and understand, why are those happening? Is it good? Is it bad? Does it suggest we should be doing this as a business? So it's a collection of quite a lot of data to try and influence and discuss strategic decisions, I would say.
And Tracy, what would your reflections be on kind of how the pack serves the meeting well, and I guess serves you as a non-exec? Because I guess that's predominantly your main source of intel, isn't it? Apart from my late afternoon phone calls when I'm driving home.
Yeah, I'm usually the Friday afternoon call. I think what Gina's done well, and it plays into your point, JT, actually, is you've obviously worked hard at getting the right information pack for the right audience and for the right purpose. And that's really quite skillful. I think we've all probably got experiences of iterations of board development, board pack development. And I think by separating them out, actually, it allows both of them to function as activities or as pieces of information that are useful to the audience they're meant to serve. And I can't stress that enough. In my portfolio career, I've had 300-page board packs, which serve no purpose at all, because nobody genuinely can ever read that much information and genuinely digest it. But what's happening in those instances is it's trying to satisfy every single audience member, and the problem is that things get lost. I think by breaking them down in the way that you've done, and certainly for me, coming into a business that first of all is new, the induction process in any business is like drinking from a fire hydrant at the best of times. Add into that complexity when you're coming into a sector where you don't have any sort of any acronym knowledge, never mind anything else, the ability to be able to read something and understand it, and therefore get up to speed with it really quickly, you can't underestimate that. So I suppose that that's a very long answer to your question, but what I'm saying is what you've done really well is you've refined the information that you're giving to the audience. And that would be a big piece of advice I would give to any board, is understand what your stakeholders or your shareholders, whoever they are, need, and tailor the information for the audience. First of all, it's productive. Secondly, it stops you wasting time producing information nobody ever actually wants. And thirdly, it cuts down on wasted conversations.
And Paul, I think it's right to say a lot of that data you use to run and operate and make decisions in the business, right? It's that type of information you're capturing.
Yeah, absolutely, JT. You know my obsession with data. I mean, I started this whole LinkedIn Live series talking about the importance of data and how to use data in the business to drive better performance. And yeah, I can't think of a conversation at board or in the information we have in our KPI pack that isn't inbuilt within our DNA of how we run the business.
Yeah. And
I guess for me, I talk to other business owners who get really nervous going to their board meetings, because what if they ask me something I don't know, and what if we end up in a conversation I don't want to have? And my attitude always is, well, it's your pack which controls the conversation. You control the conversation you want to have with part of the information you share and how you have the conversations around the board meeting. So you focus that time, as you said, Tracy, to add real value. Yeah. I think for me, historically, board meetings can be seen as a bit of a history lesson. So let's talk about what happened last month, and and dig into loads and loads of detail points around last month, rather than actually focus on the things that we can still influence, which are those things in front of us. And I think trying to strike the balance from, good governance of reporting, how do we perform last month, what's gone well, what are the things we need to pay more attention to, but spending more time focused on what's in front of us, I think is a really important discipline. I think the data.
If I may, you're because of the comprehensive nature of the data a Genie is able to produce, that month in review point or year to date in review point is a lot easier. Because it's all there, that the story tells itself through the information.
Yeah, and I think JT, what's particularly important, if I think about the board that I run ahead of our kind of exec board, it's just a build up, so the 20-page pack you get comes from a 60-page pack that I get in terms of running the business, and it is just an escalation of that same information. There are things we talk about you just wouldn't want us to talk about.
Never need to know.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. And those are just the internal mechanics. But for us, for me to produce my board pack for our meeting, we have our internal board tomorrow afternoon. We got our board with yourselves next week. It's probably about a 15-minute period of prep because it's just about taking things out of that pack that we've produced. So it becomes just a continuation of that conversation. Sorry, Tracy, I think you were.
I know, I was just going to add to what you were saying, actually, because there is something else in all of that, isn't it? Because the data is so important. I mean, you know me as well, Paul. I love data. In fact, all three of us on this call really love data, don't we? However, it's not just about the information, isn't it? It's not just about what you're presenting. It's the fact that you and the team know the data. So you've got to. It's both. So that points back trust and confidence. Sorry, trust comes from confidence. So, and again, we've all been in these situations, I'm sure, where, something's being presented to somebody, but the person who's doing the presenting isn't all over the detail or doesn't know the detail. And then they trip over that. And then suddenly, the whole thing is like a deck of cards. So to your point about, how do I control the conversation, that, the comment that's often made to you, actually, it's more about make sure you know your business, make sure you know your data, and you should know your data. And you certainly should know the data that you're giving to some of your shareholders, stakeholders, for sure.
And I think also, Tracy, lots of businesses could produce huge quantities of data. But it's what you do with it. Because if no one looks at it and makes an operational or strategic decision, then it's just wasted effort, isn't it?
Completely. And I guess, JT, it's that difference between data and insights, isn't it? We focus on having what we talk about in the business all the time about actionable insights. So yes, we measure hundreds and hundreds of data points in the business, but fundamentally our business is built on 6 or 7 real key data points and real key insights as how the business is performing. And those are things you need to be alive to. Those are things you need to be looking at literally every day to understand those trends. And I guess one point you've made a couple of points more recently, JT, actually is about focusing time on the outliers. So using the data to show actually all of these measures are exactly where we expected. They're within the tolerance that we would expect, but these are the things outside of that. So we just maybe spend a couple of minutes about, I guess, how data allows us to see those trends and how it allows us to focus on the outliers. Because I think for me, that's a really important part of our board construct.
Yeah, I mean, if I think back to the year gone by, there are probably some specific examples around that. End of last year, I think through that data, we spotted or raised a question around cancellation rates, for instance. And by all of us looking at that at the board, you were able to take operational action to say, okay, well, maybe we need to think about the way we look after and manage this client and help them in a different way, because we've seen a spike in the cancellation rate. Has there been a change in the behavior of their underlying users of their site, for instance? So that's just one example that springs to mind for me of where if we didn't have that data, such comprehensive and real-time data, that would have taken longer to talk about and therefore longer to operationally address. And I'm sure you've got dozens of other examples where you're helping clients in real time by looking at information like that.
Yeah, and I think as you know, we are data scientists and our data analyst team are so good at being able to say this is a deviation from what we expected. Whether it's the number of sites we've onboarded this month and how they're performing, cancellation rates, staff attrition, time in role in terms of our employees. We talked previously about the importance of stay interviews and what are the key points coming out of our stay interviews that maybe we need to double down and focus on. And I guess for me, it's if you understand your business and you understand how your business metrics should manifest themselves in the coming months, it allows you to understand the things which have deviated and to really pay attention. So I guess it's a little bit like bowling. If you're really great at just bowling down the middle of the lane, then perfect. But if you need the bumpers up on the side, it will allow you to manage those things which are kind of maybe going slightly off track. I
need the bumpers
all the time from having the bumpers up, to be fair. But it is great just to kind of put you back on course and say, this isn't going right. Let's put some action in place and correct it. So, Tracy, I don't know if you were coming in there or...
No, I know, but I think your point about the stay interviews is interesting, isn't it? Because what we're talking about here is a need for quite rounded information. When we think about data, there is a danger that we only think about it in a financial performance context, and clearly that is important, and ultimately that's the end goal, not the only data set that we should be looking at. The culture and the health of the business and the success of the business is predicated in many respects on the people aspects of it, never mind operational efficiency and all of those kind of areas. So having a fairly rounded data set that gives you the ability to look into the business from lots of different perspectives, is a really good place to be.
Yeah, because I guess some of those stats feed the others, don't they? So we look at it in financial performance that will be driven by an element of how well we've done operationally. Operationally will always be driven about how our people feel and how we're delivering against our headcount and our efficiency opportunities. One of the things we've measured more recently, actually, which hasn't made it to the board yet, so bear with me, it's coming, is that correlation between our headcount, particularly vacancies linked to growth, the impact on sickness, and then the impact on the overall morale of the team. So we now measure on a monthly basis the number of vacancy months we have, which when you start to measure against some of your other employment metrics, actually is a really interesting way of looking at where you're putting strain into the business. And do we see the lack of recruitment to fill our vacancies linked to growth starting to affect some of our KPIs, which then leads to some of our other more business metrics being affected. And I think you're absolutely right, Tracy. Data can be fabulous at pointing you in the right direction. We've always just got to guard against being overly analytical and only making decisions just on data. And I think it's that, as you so well put, it's that rounded view, isn't it, in your decision making? We can become very analytical, and I think if you're just making analytical decisions, you create a whole set of other problems. But that more rounded opinion of things can be.
Yeah. How do clients feel? What's the NPS? Are staff happy? If not, why not? Etc. All of that just leads into if you look after your clients, you look after your people. I like to think the rest looks after itself because you've got happy clients, happy staff.
Indeed.
Yeah. But I guess also as well, there's that opportunity where what you think is the case isn't backed up by the data. So why is that? And is that something to be concerned about or not? So it's to the point you made. It's about pointing you in the right direction. It's helping you identify which stone to lift up, isn't it?
Yeah, really cheesily, almost like your sat nav to running the business. Yeah.
You say so.
One thing I just wanted to kind of explore, maybe as we start to close and wrap up, is we've talked a lot about, and predominantly we focused here on that relationship between the exec management team, non-exec investor. For me, everything we've talked about though is relevant in every management relationship. So if I think about an employee with their team leader or a team leader with their manager, I guess I'd be interested in whether you feel it's any different at all to how we function and operate as a board, or whether people at all levels in an organization could take some of the key themes coming out of this conversation to improve, I guess, their relationship with their manager.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe that. It's isn't it just about tailoring the informational situation you're discussing? I think that applies at any level throughout an organization.
Yeah, definitely. It's what we're talking about at the end of the day is about stakeholder management, aren't we?
Yeah.
Ultimately, and regardless of the organisational structure that you're operating, in some context, everybody has a shareholder or a stakeholder that they have to manage. I worked in a business for a long time, and I didn't work with a non-exec, even though I was a board, because it just wasn't that structure. But we did have stakeholders and shareholders that we needed to work with. So yeah, absolutely. I think that if I look back over my own corporate career, one of the most important business skills I learned was how to manage stakeholders. And that certainly carried me through my executive career, and I'd say probably is one of the reasons why I was able to make the transition into being a non-exec, because it is very different, but actually being able to make that transition was because of that sort of skill and experience that I'd had. So definitely, yeah, definitely.
The phrase stakeholders often makes it sound like it's only an upwards management as well. But of course, over time, you need to learn to manage upwards as well, horizontally as well, of course. But call it upwards and downwards. So yes, what are you telling the people who you might report to? Yeah. But of course, using relationships information to get what you want out of the people who report to you is equally important as well, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely spot on, JT and Tracy, particularly when you're communicating decisions within the organization. I think backing that up by evidence, facts, data, trends, and giving context to the decision rather than just, we've made the decision, this is what we're doing next.
Yeah.
To provide that context and that understanding. And maybe if that's already been shared in the build up to a decision, I think it helps you get people on board much quicker, much easier, and actually their understanding of the issue or maybe the change direction is so much more embedded in how they go about, running their teams or operating their role. I think, sorry, Tracy.
No, I was just going to say, and here's a point. We're sort of a certain age on this call, aren't we, really? The workforces are changing. And I think, those of us who maybe have worked in a slightly more autocratic environment, it is a change. And as the younger workforce is coming through, their style of wanting to be managed is different. So actually that ability to be able to communicate and treat them as a stakeholder becomes even more important, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and adding to that, the kind of more hybrid nature of our workforces, where actually you can't just sit on the corner of someone's desk and have a conversation. It's much more remote. It's much more about information sharing. I think, like you say, end of the day, we're all stakeholders in that process, aren't we? Irrespective of the conversation, irrespective of level within the organization, everyone's there to deliver a contribution.
Indeed.
One thing I'd love to do just before we wrap up, and I hadn't prepped you at all for this because I just think your immediate reaction is going to be far better than anything you might have prepped. Just as we close, what's the one thing you'd encourage, the most important thing you'd encourage people to do in their board meetings? And what's the one thing you'd ask people not to do that, sat the side of the table that you find the most difficult to deal with?
You going first, JT?
I knew you were going to say that as well. You beat me to it. What would I encourage them to do? In all honesty, Paul, we've already talked about it. It's transparency, share the good and the bad, and together I think we can take advantage of the opportunities and overcome the challenges. That transparency is just key for me. What would I encourage people to think about changing? But perhaps it's long-winded explanations to something that is perhaps already told through data, or or we're overcomplicating the understanding of a situation, when actually I suspect it can be cut through quite easily. Overcomplication, I would avoid.
I think from
Tracy, you've had the time to think now, so it's going to be good.
I'm going to answer the question from a non-exec perspective, and it's quite easy, really. The first thing I would say is ask questions. Just that's the single most important thing to do, is ask questions. And then the second most important thing to do is don't jump in with the answer. Wait, even if you know the answer or you think you know the answer, that's not what you're there for. You're there in order to create the environment for the answers to come forward. I mean, clearly offer an opinion and what have you, but that immediate of jumping in with the answer, avoid that at all costs.
You've just played your hand perfectly there, Tracy, by encouraging me to go first as well. So
You saw what I did there, didn't you?
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, I'll answer my own question as well. I think use that board as a source of knowledge, expertise, guidance. Never be fearful of not knowing the answer. And I think, almost exploit the expertise you have around the board table for your benefit as someone, leading the organization, and exactly the same scenario, whatever room you're in with whatever people. I think the only thing I'd ask people not to do is to abdicate responsibility. Sharing problems, asking for input, that's great, but it never takes away your role of leading the organization. And I think there's a real difference between asking for guidance and trying to abdicate accountability. And I would never suggest anybody running a business should see their board as a way of saying, well, I've shared the problem with you now, so over to you. I don't think you ever have that opportunity. But it's such a great source to help you when you're grappling with maybe some of those harder and much more difficult decisions. So, lean on those people, use that expertise to your advantage would be my guidance. Right. Well, I think that probably brings us to a close. I just wanted to thank you both very much for your time. It's been great to, I guess, explore how we operate within Agena, but hopefully share some thoughts to everyone watching as well today. And for everyone watching, just a massive thanks again for joining us today. I've lost count of how many in this series we're doing now. I did a poll recently asking how people like to see content on LinkedIn, and so far most people are saying they'd like to see me recording videos. So I guess we're kind of here to stay. It's not something I particularly enjoy doing, but I have to say I do find jumping on recording a video much easier than actually sitting down trying to write an article. We're going to move now in the next phase of this LinkedIn series into focusing on ESG. So we're going to do a series of 4 slightly shorter episodes. First one, I'll just introduce what do I mean by ESG. So if you're not sure today, I'm not going to explain that. Come and join us on the next one, and you'll find out exactly what we mean by ESG and its importance in running a business in the current climate. And then we'll focus on each of those categories. So each element of our ESG strategy, we'll do a mini session on each of those. I'll be joined through that by Ian Roberts, who heads up our ESG strategy for us. And what I particularly want to talk about to people within businesses, why ESG is now helping us secure new business and actually is a core part of our growth. I get incredibly irritated by greenwashing. And again, I'll explain next time what I mean by that. But embedding ESG in your business and how that can actually allow you to become more successful and actually facilitate more growth. And most importantly, employee retention. So hopefully everyone will come back and join us. You can see in the link below the ability to join that event. So please, while you're with us now, go and register for the next event. We'll be live in a couple of weeks' time and look forward to welcoming you all there. But final thanks just goes to Tracy and JT for your time today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and we will catch up next week in our board meeting.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks both.
Thanks, Paul.